Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I used to do deliveries for a small supply company a few years back. I wasn't a truck driver or anything, just had a beat-up white van that I used for work. Most of my routes were in and around town, construction sites, hardware stores, that sort of thing. But there was one customer who lived way out past the edge of everything. It was one of those drives where you start wondering if you missed a turn because you've been going straight for so long. It took about 40 minutes just to get from the highway exit to where they were, right in the middle of nowhere, between two towns but not close to either, surrounded by woods and empty fields. I used to get assigned that route once every month, sometimes less. The drive always had a strange kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful, more like empty. Even during the day it felt like no one else was around for miles. The road itself was cracked and narrow, with patches where grass pushed through the asphalt. Every so often I'd pass an old mailbox or a broken fence leaning into the ditch, and there was this one stretch, maybe 2 miles long, where a few houses sat close to the road. They looked ancient, wood siding gray from age, windows either broken or boarded up, yards swallowed by weeds and trees that had grown too close. The first time I drove past, I slowed down just to look. It was the kind of place you could tell hadn't seen life in years. No cars, no lights, no curtains, no sign that anyone still called it home. After a few months, I got used to seeing them. They became just another marker on the drive, like a checkpoint that told me I was halfway there. I never saw anyone there, not once. I would always pass at least one car somewhere on the route though, usually an old pickup or a farm truck heading the other way. Just enough to remind me I wasn't the only one out there. Then came this one day in the fall. It was late afternoon, maybe 4 or 5, and the light had that orange look that happens before sunset. The air was heavy and still, like it gets before rain. I remember noticing how quiet it was that day, even more than usual. No birds, no wind moving through the trees, nothing. I'd been driving almost 30 minutes without seeing another car. The fields on either side were dry and brown, the kind of color that makes everything look tired. As I got closer to that stretch with the old houses, I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't fear exactly, just that subtle feeling when something doesn't sit right. The road curved slightly, and I could see the first house coming up, the one with the collapsed porch. But as I passed the second house, I noticed something in the yard. Someone was there. It was an old woman. She was pushing one of those manual, real lawn mowers, the kind with the spinning blades that don't use gas. Her yard, if you could call it that, was mostly dead grass and dirt patches. It didn't make sense to be mowing it, but she was. She wore a long, faded dress, gray or maybe blue, with an apron over it. Her hair was white and tied back. At first, I was just surprised to see anyone at all. As I got closer, she stopped moving. Completely stopped. The mower just sat there in front of her. She didn't wave or step aside. She just stood, facing the road, staring straight ahead. I thought maybe I was going too fast, so I eased off the gas. I remember my foot hovering over the brake as I passed her. When I looked out the side window, she was still staring, eyes fixed on me. Something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. It wasn't just that she was watching me, it was how still she was. No blink, no shift of weight. No reaction to the sound of my van. It was like she had frozen the second she saw me coming. I drove past her trying to shake it off. I told myself she probably lived there and was just startled by seeing a stranger drive by. That made sense. But then out of instinct I checked my rearview mirror. She was still standing in the same spot, but now she had turned completely around. She was facing me, watching me go. The lawnmower had tipped slightly to one side, like she'd let it fall. I could see her figure in the mirror getting smaller and smaller, still motionless, still staring. I don't know why that bothered me so much, but it did. It wasn't fear in the jump scare way. It was deeper, like my body knew something wasn't right even if my mind couldn't explain it. I kept glancing back, waiting for her to move or go back to mowing, but she didn't. By the time I reached my customer's place, I had mostly convinced myself it was nothing. I did the drop-off, made small talk for a few minutes, and got back on the road before the sun went down. The drive back was just as empty, and I caught myself looking for her as I neared that stretch again. But the yard was empty. The mower was gone. For the next several months, I kept doing that route. Each time I passed those houses, I looked for any sign of her. I never saw her again. The houses looked the same, lifeless and sinking further into the ground. The grass grew taller each month until even the front porches were half covered. After about 10 months, I stopped getting that route altogether. They reassigned deliveries, and I didn't think about it again until a couple years later, when I happened to drive that way for something else. I slowed down when I got to that same stretch. The houses were still there, or what was left of them. The one where I'd seen the old woman had collapsed completely. Just a pile of wood and shingles, half hidden by weeds. There wasn't even a clear spot where a yard used to be. It was as if no one had lived there for decades. That's when it really hit me how strange the whole thing was. For 6 months before that day, I had never seen anyone near those houses. For almost a year after, still no one. And the condition of those buildings, there's no way they were livable. The one she'd been in front of didn't even have a full roof when I last passed it. Sometimes I think maybe she wasn't living there at all. Maybe she was visiting or passing through, or maybe she was someone's relative from long ago who just wandered back. But the thing that always sticks with me isn't who she was, it's how she moved or didn't move. That frozen moment when she saw me, when the world around her seemed to stop. It's been years now and I still drive a lot for work, but I've never had another route that quiet, that far out. And every once in a while when I'm on an empty road in the middle of nowhere, I find myself checking the rearview mirror a little too long, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. It was the summer after my junior year in high school, and it was one of those nights that stays in your head for years, not because anything dramatic happened, but because of how quietly wrong it all felt. My dad's birthday had just passed, and he wanted to do something different that year. So he decided we'd drive out with my uncle to a casino about 2 hours away to watch a boxing match. My mom didn't come. She wasn't into the noise and smoke and all that. But my dad, my uncle, and I were excited. Felt like a little adventure. One of those short summer trips that are simple but memorable. The day was long and hot, the kind where the car's air conditioner barely made a difference. We left in the late afternoon, reached the casino before sunset, watched the match and grabbed dinner afterward. The fight ended around 10, and by the time we were back on the road, it was close to midnight. Everyone was tired, the kind of tired that sets deep in your body after a long day. I remember leaning my head against the window, watching the lights fade as we drove farther away from the city. The roads were empty except for the occasional truck heading in the opposite direction. Before entering the canyon, we called my mom. Reception was fine up to that point, but we knew once we went in it would cut off. It always did. The canyon stretched for about 30 miles, winding, silent. No lights except our headlights and the dim glow of the dashboard. We told her we'd be home soon, probably within half an hour, and then we lost signal like clockwork. The canyon always had a strange atmosphere at night. Even when I was younger, I used to get this uneasy feeling when we passed through it. During the day, it looked normal. Rock formations, dry shrubs, bits of sand and gravel. But at night, everything melted into dark shapes and shadows. The headlights carved out small pieces of the road, while the rest of the world disappeared into black. We started talking to stay awake. My uncle began telling one of his old stories from when he was a truck driver. Something about getting lost in the desert for hours. My dad laughed and started his own story about camping trips when he was younger. I added a few of my own, mostly random creepy stories I remembered from friends. It was one of those drifting conversations where you lose track of time. Just voices and headlights cutting through the dark. After what felt like a long while, I noticed a familiar shape up ahead, a tall rock formation that stuck out from the canyon wall like a giant shoulder. We all knew it well. It was called the Butte by locals, a landmark you always passed near the halfway point of the canyon. Seeing it usually meant we were about 15 minutes from home. I remember glancing at the dashboard clock. It said 12:30, that made sense. We'd been driving for about half an hour, but after a while something started to feel off. The road kept stretching out, endless. The conversation faded. I was looking out the window again, feeling that strange drowsiness that happens when you've been in a car too long. And then up ahead the same butte came into view again. The exact same one. At first I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe there was another rock formation that looked similar, or maybe my eyes were just tired. But the angle, the slope of the rock, the way the shadow fell, it was identical. I didn't say anything at first, but my stomach sank a little. The road curved the same way it did the first time we passed it. The cliffs on the left, the dry riverbed on the right, it all matched perfectly. I glanced at the clock again. It was just past 1 a.m. Something about that didn't sit right with me. There was no way we were still inside the canyon. We should have been home by now. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the tires rolling over the road. My uncle had stopped talking, and my dad's face was fixed on the windshield. The longer we drove, the heavier the air inside the car felt. None of us wanted to say what we were thinking, but it was there. Something wasn't adding up. The same bends, the same formations, the same damn butte. It was like being stuck in a loop you couldn't see but could feel pressing in on you. The dashboard clock ticked on, minute by minute, but everything outside looked frozen. I tried to tell myself it was just tiredness, that we were confusing the scenery. Canyons often repeated themselves. Rock walls, dry brush, the occasional turn. But this wasn't the same kind of repetition. It was too precise. Every detail was the same as before. After a while, we stopped talking completely. The only sound was the car. I remember staring at the yellow lines on the road, the way they flickered in and out of sight under the headlights. It felt like if I blinked too long, the world outside would disappear. Then, almost suddenly, the canyon began to change. The turns widened, the cliffs drew back, and I saw the faint glow of distant lights ahead. It was the town. Just like that, we were out. The air seemed lighter. The clock read 1:15 a.m. My dad picked up his phone and tried to call my mom, and the signal came back right away. When she answered, her voice was shaky. She said she'd been calling for over an hour. She thought something had happened because we never took that long. When we got home, the house was dark except for the porch light she'd left on. The drive that was supposed to take half an hour through the canyon had somehow stretched into nearly twice that. We didn't talk about it much once we were inside. Everyone just wanted to sleep. But lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The repetition, the way the butte appeared twice, the gap in time that made no sense. The next day I checked the map. I even tried to retrace the drive online, measuring distances, looking for turns we might have missed. There wasn't any. The canyon had one main road, no side paths, no alternate routes. And even if we had slowed down, it shouldn't have taken that long. I thought about the feeling of the drive, the strange haze, the way time felt like it folded in on itself. We talked about it a few times over the years, but never with any real answers. My dad just shrugged it off as fatigue or maybe bad perception from driving tired. My uncle agreed. But every time I remember that night, I still see that same rock formation, the headlights hitting it the same way, the same quiet stretch of road that should have ended long before it did. Maybe we were just tired. Maybe time really does play tricks when your body is worn out and your mind starts to drift. Or maybe for that one strange hour, the canyon swallowed us a little longer than it should have. Kept us inside just long enough for the world outside to keep moving while we lagged behind. We got home. We were safe, but that missing 45 minutes still sits somewhere I can't explain. Somewhere between two identical turns in the dark. I used to run hotshot freight across the Great Plains and into the upper Midwest. Mostly I hauled parts or machinery for farms that needed something fixed as fast as possible. I spent more nights on empty highways than I can even count, watching the endless black ribbon of road stretch on, through places so flat you could almost see the curve of the earth. You don't really understand how empty parts of North Dakota are until you've driven them at 2 in the morning, when the only thing breaking the silence is the low hum of your own engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on asphalt. That night I was hauling a large tractor part, a final drive assembly, for a farm just outside Billings, Montana. They needed it by morning or they'd be losing an entire day of work, which meant money. And for people out there, that's no small thing. I'd been driving since mid-afternoon, and by 2 a.m. I was well past Bismarck, heading west, somewhere between Glen Ullin and Dickinson. The sky was clear, but the moon was thin, and the highway stretched out ahead of me like a black ribbon with just my headlights cutting through the dark. I'd driven that route many times before. You get to know the feeling of the land out there, how it swells just a little before dropping again, how the lights of a distant town look like stars that fell and got stuck on the ground. There's a strange stillness to it. It almost feels like you're the last person left in the world. It was quiet enough that the hum of the diesel engine started to sound like white noise, and I felt that familiar haze creeping in, the kind of half-dreamy trance that comes from staring at an endless straight road for too long. Highway hypnosis. I dealt with it plenty of times before. Usually I'd just crack the window and let the freezing wind slap me awake. That night, though, I thought I could push through it. The first time I noticed something ahead, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It looked like a dark line lying across my lane. From that distance, I figured it was just a chunk of tire tread. Happens all the time. Those big pieces of rubber blow off truck tires and end up scattered across the road. I eased off the gas a little. Not enough to lose momentum, but enough to give me time to switch lanes when I got closer. But as the seconds passed and I got nearer, the shape didn't look quite right. It wasn't broken or uneven like a piece of tire. It was long and solid, stretching from one side of my lane to the other. My headlights started to catch it better, and that's when I realized it wasn't just one object. It was two people, lying on the highway. They were head to toe, perfectly lined up, one's feet next to the other's head, stretched across the width of the lane like some kind of human barricade. I felt my stomach drop. My first thought was that maybe there'd been an accident. Maybe they'd been hit or thrown from a car. I swerved hard into the opposite lane, heart pounding, tires whining against the pavement, and managed to pass them cleanly. I slowed down, almost to a stop. The truck's hazard lights clicked rhythmically in the silence. I looked into the mirrors, expecting to see movement, someone waving for help, but they didn't move. Not an inch. Just two still shapes under my red tail lights, sprawled across the road like mannequins. For a few seconds, I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind started flipping through possibilities. Drunk people, a wreck, some kind of twisted prank. Every instinct I had told me to turn around and check on them. I even started to ease the truck into reverse. But that's when something old and half-forgotten surfaced in my memory. Years ago, when I first started doing long hauls, there was this old-timer. Everyone called him Graybeard because of his ridiculous silver beard that went down to his chest. He used to tell stories while we were waiting on loads. One night he told me about a trick people used out in remote areas. They'd lie down in the middle of the road, pretending to be hurt, waiting for some good Samaritan to stop. When the driver got out, others would come out of the darkness, from behind trees, from ditches, from tall grass. And they'd rob him, maybe worse. Take the truck, the freight, everything, leave him stranded miles from the nearest town. I'd laughed it off back then. Thought it was just one of those exaggerated road stories old drivers like to tell. But sitting there that night, alone on a desolate stretch of North Dakota highway, that story didn't seem funny anymore. It didn't even seem far-fetched. The road was surrounded by nothing but open prairie, but there were plenty of spots along the shoulder where someone could crouch down out of sight. I watched in the mirror for another moment. The two figures still didn't move. The only sound was the idling rumble of the engine. The air felt too still, too deliberate, like everything around me was holding its breath. I shifted the truck back into drive. The sound of the gear engaging was sharp, final. As soon as I started rolling forward, the figures moved. Both of them. At the same time, they sat up quickly like puppets pulled upright by strings, and then stood. One of them pointed toward me. They didn't run or wave or shout. They just started walking toward the shoulder, toward the darkness. That was all the proof I needed. I hit the gas and didn't let off for miles. I called the police once I had a signal again, gave them my exact location, told them what I'd seen. The dispatcher sounded calm, said they'd send a unit to check, but we both knew how that went. Out there it could take an hour for anyone to reach that stretch of road, and by then, whatever had happened would be long over. The rest of that night felt endless. Every shadow in the ditches looked like it was moving. Every flicker of light from distant farmhouses made me tense. I kept the radio off because the silence somehow felt safer than the noise. When I finally saw the faint glow of the Montana State Line station, I realized I'd been gripping the wheel so tightly, my hands ached. I delivered the part the next morning, just like planned. The farmer was relieved, shook my hand, told me I'd saved his week. I smiled, but I couldn't shake the image of those two people lying head to toe in the middle of that empty road. The way they got up in perfect sync when I started moving again. The way they just walked into the darkness without a word. Later that day, I checked the news and police reports out of curiosity. There was nothing, no mention of anyone found on the highway. No missing persons, no arrests, nothing at all. I tried to tell myself maybe it was some kids playing a prank, or a couple of drunks who passed out on the road. But I've seen enough strange things in my years of driving to know when something isn't right. That night wasn't just strange, it felt planned. Every time I drive through North Dakota now, I can't help but glance a little farther down the road than I used to, watching for shapes that don't belong. And every time I see some dark patch lying across the lane, my first instinct isn't to stop. It's to remember the old man with the gray beard who told me that story all those years ago. He probably saved my life that night, maybe even more than once. I remember that night because it was one of those long, empty stretches of road where time seemed to stretch out like the tarmac itself. My dad drove trucks between Edinburgh and London for most of his life, and sometimes when I'm driving alone late at night, I think about what he told me. He swore the story was true, and the way he told it, his voice low and steady, his eyes fixed somewhere far away, it never felt like one of those stories you tell for fun. It felt like something that stayed with him. He was hauling a load of electronics down the motorway, a routine run he'd done dozens of times. It was just after midnight, the kind of dark where the sky looks heavy and flat, and the only light comes from the white lines flashing under your wheels and the occasional glare of another vehicle. He said the radio was playing quietly, some late-night talk show, and the hum of the engine filled in the gaps between the static. He'd just passed Newcastle and was heading south, drinking lukewarm coffee from a metal flask to keep himself awake. It was somewhere along that stretch that he noticed the first car. A small silver hatchback creeping up alongside him in the right lane. He didn't think much of it. People pass trucks all the time. But he glanced over, mostly out of habit. And that's when he saw her, a woman in the passenger seat staring straight at him. Her hair was pulled tight into one of those severe buns, like Miss Trunchbull from Matilda, he always said. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and she looked absolutely terrified. Not scared, not surprised, terrified. He said it was so quick, just a few seconds as they matched speed. She didn't look away, didn't blink. The man driving beside her never looked over. just kept his eyes on the road. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the car indicated, moved into the exit lane, and disappeared off the motorway. He drove on, but something about it wouldn't leave his head. He tried to reason with himself. Maybe she was having a panic attack. Maybe the driver had said something that scared her. Maybe she'd been arguing and he just caught a bad moment. But he said the look on her face wasn't something you could mistake. It wasn't anger or surprise. It was raw fear, like she was silently begging for help. Half an hour later, still thinking about it, he was somewhere past Leeds when another car appeared on his right. Different car this time, a dark blue sedan. He looked over and his stomach dropped. The same woman. Same bun, same pale face, same terrified stare. Different driver. He said it didn't make sense. There was no reason she should be there again, in a completely different car. He felt this cold, slow chill spread through his chest. He knew every inch of that motorway, and it wasn't like there were shortcuts or parallel roads she could have taken to appear again. He tried to shake it off, but this time the fear was real. He decided he'd stop at the next services. Even if it turned out to be nothing, he'd report it. Better to be cautious. But before he could take the next exit, the blue car sped up and vanished into the distance. He never caught the plate number, and after a few miles, he figured calling the police without any details would be useless. So he just kept driving, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. The night dragged on. The road was mostly empty except for the odd headlights that came and went. The air inside the cab felt heavier than usual, and every time a car came up behind him, he found himself checking the mirrors too often. He said he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like he wasn't alone even when the road was empty. 4 hours later, near the outskirts of London, he saw her again. This time it was a white estate car. He noticed it before it even pulled level. Something about the way it stayed close to his truck, hovering in his blind spot. When it finally came alongside him, his stomach turned to ice. Same woman, same bun, same terrified expression. But this time she wasn't just staring, she was screaming. He couldn't hear her through the glass and engine noise, but he could see it. The way her mouth moved, wide open, desperate. Her eyes locked on him again. He said it felt like she was trying to tell him something, warning him, begging him. The driver, a different man again, never looked over, just stared straight ahead. Then the car suddenly sped up, swerving slightly before disappearing into the darkness ahead. That was it for him. He pulled off at the next lay-by, shaking so badly he could barely dial the number on his phone. When he called the police, they asked him for his location and details. He told them everything. 3 different cars, same woman, same look, and now she was screaming. The officer on the phone went quiet for a few seconds before saying they'd already had several calls about the same thing from other drivers in the area. That chilled him even more. They told him to stay put until a patrol car could come by, so he waited there on the shoulder of the motorway, engine idling, eyes fixed on the dark stretch of road ahead. After about 15 minutes, flashing blue lights appeared behind him. 2 officers got out, spoke to him, took down everything he remembered. They thanked him and said they were investigating, that there had been multiple reports of a woman matching that description seen in different vehicles between Birmingham and London that night. He said he asked them if they knew what was going on, but they didn't say much, just that they were looking into it. Eventually, they told him he could go. He didn't see her again that night. He finished his route, unloaded, and drove back north the next morning, but he said that drive never felt the same again. Every time he saw a car pull alongside him, he'd tense up, expecting to see that same face. For weeks afterward, he checked the news every night. He expected something, a missing person report, a police appeal, something that would make sense of it. But there was nothing, no mention of any woman like that. No investigation updates, nothing at all. It just disappeared. He tried to rationalize it later. Maybe it was some strange prank, though who would go to those lengths? Maybe he imagined parts of it, though he never struck me as the type to hallucinate. But every time he told the story, his voice would slow, his eyes would go distant, and he'd say the same thing. It wasn't just once. It was her. Every time. She was trying to tell me something. He never drove that route again after a few months. Switched to local deliveries closer to home. Said he was getting too old for long hauls. But I always wondered if it was because of her. He's retired now. But sometimes when I'm on the motorway at night, I catch myself checking the cars that pass beside me. And I think about that woman. Same face, same bun, same silent scream frozen in the dark. Whatever happened to her, I don't think anyone ever found out. But my dad swore, right up until the last time he told it, that she was real. And that she was still out there, somewhere, trying to be seen. I still don't know how my father made it out alive. Every time he told me this story, his voice would drop, his eyes would lose focus, and he'd go quiet for a moment before continuing. He said he could still smell the damp air of Rwanda, thick with smoke and fear. It was the early 90s, and he had been driving a shipment route that went from Uganda down through Rwanda and into Burundi. He'd been doing that route for years, long before anyone had imagined what was about to happen there. The roads were rough, the heat was unbearable, and the silence between small towns felt endless. But he liked the solitude. He liked the feeling of being the only one for miles. That trip, though, was different. He said he noticed it before he even reached the border. The air was heavier than usual, and there was a strange stillness in the villages. Normally, kids would run after his truck waving, women would sell fruits by the road, and men would shout greetings as he passed. That time there was nothing. The markets were closed. Doors were shut. Smoke rose from places that should have been quiet. He didn't think much of it then. Maybe there had been some trouble. Maybe it was just another bad week. But when he reached the first Rwandan checkpoint, everything changed. There were soldiers everywhere. They looked tense, angry, their fingers tight on the triggers of their guns. My father slowed the truck and rolled to a stop. He wasn't worried. He'd been through countless checkpoints before. He had his ID ready, his papers in order, but this time they didn't even look at them. One of the soldiers shouted something in Kinyarwanda that my father didn't understand. Before he could speak, two of them pulled him out of the truck. They looked at him like he was already guilty of something. One of them pointed a gun at his face while another yanked his shirt open, studying his features. My father didn't know it then, but to them, he looked like a Tutsi. He tried to explain. He tried saying in Swahili that he was Kenyan, a driver just passing through, but they didn't care. They shoved him toward a group of people sitting on the ground, their hands tied, faces covered in dirt and blood. He realized they weren't travelers, they were prisoners. Some of them were barely standing. He said the moment he was pushed into the group, he felt the weight of fear settle into his stomach. He knew something was deeply wrong. They marched the group to a small camp not far from the road. It wasn't a prison, not really. Just a fenced area made of wire and wood with a few makeshift huts nearby. Inside, there were dozens of people crammed together. Men, women, even a few children. The smell hit him before he even entered. Sweat, blood, waste, and something else, something rotten. He said that smell never left his nose for years. They threw him into the cage with the others and locked it behind him. The ground was muddy, mixed with old blood. People were whispering, praying, crying quietly. No one spoke his language. He sat in silence, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. But the only thing he could hear were the distant screams from somewhere deeper in the camp. That first night, they came for 5 people. The soldiers dragged them out one by one. No one fought. No one screamed. The others just sat, watching, their eyes empty. My father said the sound of machetes cutting through flesh was something that stayed in his head for decades. They killed them in front of everyone, slowly, methodically. He couldn't move. He couldn't look away. He said he thought of his wife and of me, just a small child then, waiting for him to come home. He thought about how we'd never know what happened to him. When morning came, the sun rose red over the hills. The soldiers were laughing and drinking nearby, as if the night before had been nothing. My father sat in silence, staring at the bodies they hadn't bothered to move. He said time felt strange there. Hours stretched into days, and every sound made his heart race. He had no food, no water, and the heat made it hard to breathe. By the second night, they came again. More screams, more silence afterward. The prisoners were shrinking in number, their eyes becoming hollow. He said the worst part wasn't the killings. It was the waiting, knowing they would come again, and not knowing when it would be your turn. By the third night, he had stopped trying to think of escape. He had accepted that he might die there. That's when he noticed a man watching him closely, sitting just a few feet away. The man had been quiet the whole time, older, his clothes torn and his face bruised. Late that night, when the soldiers were distracted, the man whispered a few words in Swahili. My father couldn't believe it. Finally, someone who understood him. The man spoke slowly, his voice rough and weak. He asked who my father was. My father told him he was a truck driver from Kenya, just passing through, not Rwandan. The man nodded slowly, thinking. My father showed him his ID, his truck papers, anything that could prove what he said. The man didn't promise anything. He just said, wait. He didn't see the man again until the next afternoon. The soldiers came back shouting, opening the cage. My father thought it was over. But the man pointed at him and said something to one of the guards. There was an argument, some yelling, and then suddenly they pulled my father out. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. They dragged him to a small tent near the checkpoint. One of the officers was looking at his papers, frowning. Then without a word, the man who had helped him appeared again, holding something, my father's truck keys. He handed them to him, motioning for him to leave. My father didn't wait. He walked straight back to his truck, his legs shaking. He half expected a bullet in his back before he reached it. When he got inside, he didn't start the engine right away. He sat there, hands trembling, staring out at the camp in the distance. He could still see the cage. He could still hear the screams. He said part of him wanted to go back, to do something. But what could he do? He was one man with no weapon, no power. He turned the key and the truck came alive. He drove for hours without stopping, without even knowing where he was going. When he finally crossed back into Uganda, he parked by the roadside and just sat there. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He said he felt both alive and dead at the same time. He never saw the man who saved him again. He didn't even know his name. But he said he never forgot his face, the quiet strength in his eyes, the calm in the middle of that horror. Years later, when I was old enough to understand, he told me the story not to scare me, but to remind me how thin the line is between life and death. He said that sometimes survival has nothing to do with strength or courage. It's just luck and the kindness of one stranger. Every time he drove after that, through storms, through the dark, through the loneliest stretches of road, he carried that memory with him. And even though he escaped, he said a part of him never really left that cage in Rwanda. I'd been driving all night, the kind of long, empty haul that makes you start to feel like the only person left on the planet. It was close to 3 a.m. when I finally pulled off an exit ramp to take my 10-hour. I'd been running heavy all day, eyes burning from the white lines and caffeine wearing off, so I figured I'd just find a quiet spot, park, and catch some rest before daylight. The ramp was deserted, the kind where you can see a half-mile of cracked asphalt stretching into nothing. To my right was a field that looked recently harvested, cut corn, the stalks low and sharp like little spears sticking out of the dirt. The moon was full and hanging high, bright enough to cast long shadows across everything. I got the truck leveled, set the brake, and killed the engine. The silence hit hard. Out there, without the hum of tires or the low drone of the CB, the world felt hollow. That's when I noticed it, a shape out in the field. At first glance, it was just a dark, upright figure standing among the cut corn. It looked human, no question. For a second, I felt that flicker in my gut, that old instinct that whispers something isn't right. But I brushed it off. Figured it was some farmer's scarecrow or maybe an old man playing around out there. The countryside has plenty of strange sights, and by 3 a.m. your brain likes to make shadows into people. I told myself not to think about it. I leaned back in the sleeper, scrolling through YouTube on my phone, half watching some video just to keep my mind off the stillness outside. Every few minutes, a car or semi would go by on the highway, headlights sweeping through my cab, before vanishing back into darkness. I must have watched for about half an hour when something in the corner of my eye caught movement. Just a flicker, a subtle shift. I froze, screen light bouncing off my face. I turned my head slowly toward the window, squinting past my reflection. The figure was still there, same shape, same spot. But for a moment I had this feeling. It wasn't the same. I couldn't be sure, but it looked closer. Not by much, but maybe 10, 15 feet closer to the road. I told myself I was tired, eyes playing tricks. I'd been up since the morning before, and exhaustion does weird things. I turned off my phone screen and sat in the dark cab, letting my eyes adjust to the moonlight. Outside, the world looked bleached silver, the field glowing faintly. I stared at the figure, trying to lock in some reference point, a fence post, a bush, anything, to see if it really had moved. But after a minute or two, I couldn't tell anymore. It just stood there, motionless, watching nothing. I finally told myself to quit being stupid. Scarecrows don't move. People don't stand in fields at 3 in the morning for no reason. And if they do, it's none of my business. I settled back, shut my eyes, but my bladder wouldn't let me sleep. Coffee and energy drinks had caught up to me. I thought about grabbing an empty bottle, but that felt pathetic. I told myself to quit acting like a kid and just step out. It was quiet, sure, but I'd done this hundreds of times before. I took one more glance out the window before getting out. The figure was still there, exactly where I expected it to be. That gave me a little relief. At least something stayed put. I opened the door, the hinges creaking loud in the cold night air. The smell of dirt and cut corn drifted in, sharp and earthy. I stepped down onto the gravel, the crunch under my boots echoing louder than it should have. The air felt heavy, the kind that presses on your skin. I walked between the truck and trailer, just enough cover to do what I needed to do. As I stood there, I kept my eyes on the shadow cast by my rig, trying not to think about that field. The urge to look was like an itch under my skin. I told myself to focus on the job, just finish up, get back in, and lock the damn doors. But I couldn't help it. Something in my gut twisted, that same ancient instinct again, like being watched. I turned my head slowly, eyes scanning the field. It took a second to process what I was seeing or what I wasn't. The field was empty. The figure was gone. My whole body went cold. Not scared in the movie sense, but that deep, real kind of fear, where your brain starts calculating everything at once. How far you are from the cab, how exposed you are, how quiet it is. I felt my stomach drop, my breath shorten. I zipped up fast, didn't even bother checking the ground, just moved. I jogged back toward the cab, boots slipping a little on the gravel. I didn't look anywhere but my truck. I yanked the door open, jumped in, and slammed it shut, locking both sides without thinking. My heart was hammering so hard it made my vision pulse. I flipped on my headlights, scanning the field. Nothing. Just rows of cut stalks shining silver in the moonlight. The space where the figure had been was bare, open, empty. I checked the mirrors, nobody behind me, nobody on the shoulder. The whole world felt wrong. I didn't even stop to reason with myself. I just turned the key, fired up the engine, released the brake, and got the hell out of there. Violation or not, I wasn't staying another second. I drove for 40 minutes straight, maybe more, until I spotted the glow of a Love's Travel stop up ahead. I pulled in under the bright canopy, surrounded by other trucks, people moving around, lights everywhere. I finally felt like I could breathe again. I parked, cut the engine, and just sat there staring at my hands on the wheel. They were shaking. I kept thinking about that figure, how it had been there, how it had disappeared without a trace. No sound, no movement, nothing, just gone. The field hadn't been tall enough for anyone to hide. There was nowhere for a person to go. I told myself maybe it really had been a scarecrow, and I just lost sight of it. Maybe the moonlight and shadows played tricks. That's the story I stuck with because the alternatives didn't make sense. But deep down, I knew something was off. I've been driving for years, parked in all kinds of lonely places, mountain pull-offs, desert rest areas, ghost towns, but I've never once felt that kind of presence before. like something was out there that wasn't supposed to be. I don't stop on ramps anymore, not once since that night. Doesn't matter how tired I am or how bad I need to shut down, I'll find a lit lot, even if I've got to push the clock. Because every time I think about that field, I still see that figure standing there under the moon, just far enough away that I couldn't tell what it was, and just close enough that I knew it was looking right back at me. I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia, a stretch of country so empty and dry that you start to forget what green even looks like. The roads ran straight for hours with nothing but red dust, spinifex, and distant scrub to break the horizon. I drove mostly night shifts because it was cooler, and there was less traffic. But the nights out there could do strange things to your head. People talk about the black dog out in the bush, how it creeps up on drivers when they're alone too long. You get tired, start seeing shapes in the dark, shadows that seem to move on their own. I'd seen plenty of that. Things appearing out of nowhere, shapes that looked like people or animals until you blinked and they were gone. Sometimes 3 goats standing by the side of the road would look like something crawling toward the truck, all legs and teeth, until the headlights caught them properly. Fatigue plays tricks like that. One night, I was hauling up near the Kennedy Range. I'd been on the road about 10 hours, watching the temperature gauge hover just under 40, even though it was past midnight. The only sound was the engine humming and the tires humming against the bitumen. You go into a kind of trance after that long. Just the white lines flicking past, the lights bouncing off the scrub, and the low vibration of the diesel under your seat. Every now and then I'd catch myself zoning out, like my brain was 10 seconds behind my eyes. That's the danger of those long night runs. You start to lose track of what's real. At one point I swear I saw a dog on the road, a small one, like a corgi of all things. A bloody corgi in the middle of the outback. I saw it in the headlights right there on the bitumen, tail up and ears pointed at me. I hit the brakes hard enough for the trailers to rattle, but when the truck stopped, there was nothing there. I got out and checked with a torch, walked up and down the road for a bit. Not a mark, not even tracks in the dust, just the sound of wind blowing across the empty flats. I told myself I'd imagined it, but it left a knot in my stomach. Odds of a corgi being out there were near zero. Later that night, I decided to pull over and sleep. There's a small clearing near one of the old service tracks where drivers sometimes stop. I parked the truck there, killed the lights, and let the engine idle for a bit to cool down. The silence hits you different out there. It's not really silence. It's a low hum of wind, insects, the distant hiss of the engine cooling. I set my alarm for a couple of hours, climbed into the sleeper, and stretched out. The bunk wasn't exactly comfortable, but after driving that long, you could fall asleep on gravel. I remember the faint smell of diesel, the creak of metal as the cab settled, and the way the wind brushed against the door seals. At some point, I drifted off. I don't know how long I was asleep, but something woke me. A sound. Not voices, but noise. Structured noise, if that makes sense. It wasn't random. It came in bursts and pauses, almost like something was moving with purpose outside. I stayed still, listening. The air inside the cab felt different, thick like the air before a storm. Then I felt the truck move. Just a little at first, like something brushed against it, then again harder. The whole cab gave a small shake. I thought maybe it was the wind picking up, but the way it jolted didn't match. Felt like something was pushing or bumping or leaning into the side. I sat up, heart going, and peered out through the small rear window. Couldn't see much, just my own reflection and darkness beyond the glass. Then I noticed shadows, faint, moving around the edges of the truck. Not people-shaped, not clearly animals either. Just motion. I grabbed the torch and shone it out the side window, but the beam hit only dust swirling around the wheels. The shaking kept going, soft but steady, like hands pushing against the cab. I could hear the tarp on the trailer flapping and something thumping near the back axles. I didn't think. I climbed forward, turned the key, and fired up the engine. The sound of that motor roaring to life was the best thing I'd ever heard. I flicked every light on, spots, floods, the roof bar, all of it. The area around the truck lit up like day, and whatever those shadows were, they were gone. The shaking stopped. I shoved it into gear and rolled out, dust flying up behind me. The mirrors showed nothing but darkness and the red trail of dust stretching behind. I drove the rest of the night without stopping. My eyes felt like sandpaper. My hands locked on the wheel, but I wasn't pulling over again. By the time I reached the port, the sun was coming up, pale and sharp over the ocean. I parked up and just sat there for a while, letting the light pour in through the windshield. The world felt normal again. People walking around, forklifts moving, radio chatter. I told myself it was wind. It had to be. Out there, gusts come hard and sudden, especially near the ridges. Maybe some goats were wandering around the truck. Maybe I dreamt half of it. But here's the thing that still gets me. That cab weighed close to 8 tons, and it doesn't shake easy. The way it moved that night, it felt deliberate, like something with weight and intent was pressing on it. I went over the truck later, checked the doors, the panels, the steps. There were no dents, no scuff marks, no tracks in the dust around the tires. Nothing. Just as if nothing had ever happened. After that night, I never slept out on shift again. I'd drive through no matter how tired I got. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see those shapes again in the corner of the lights. I never did, but every now and then when the wind picks up and the trailers start to sway, I still feel that same cold knot in my gut. I can rationalize it all I want, fatigue, wind, imagination, but some part of me knows what I felt that night was real, even if I'll never be able to explain it. Out there in the middle of nowhere, you learn that not everything has to make sense to be true. Well, it was creepy at first. I pulled into the Purdue plant late in the evening, just as the sky was turning from that dusty blue to a heavy gray. The kind of night where the air feels thick and smells like metal and diesel. I'd been driving for about 11 hours straight. My eyes were gritty, and I could feel that dull, aching tiredness that only long hauls can give you. I dropped my empty trailer in the designated spot, checked the latch, and then bobtailed over to where they let trucks park overnight. It wasn't much. Just a patch of gravel beside a chain-link fence and a pond that sat quiet and black under a flickering light pole. I figured it'd do. My pickup wasn't until 7 a.m., which gave me a good 12 hours to rest. After parking, I did my post-trip inspection, walking slowly around the truck, kicking tires, checking lights. The plant was quiet. You could hear a forklift beeping in the distance, and the hum of machinery echoing from one of the warehouses. There was a faint smell of chicken feed and something wet, mud or maybe that pond water. Every now and then, a splash from the pond broke the silence. Probably a fish or frog or something. I didn't think much of it. I'd slept in worse places. I climbed into the bunk, stretched out, and felt the familiar creak of the mattress under me. My back popped and I let out a long sigh. It felt good to just lay there. The hum of the refrigerator unit somewhere in the distance mixing with the faint ticking of the truck engine cooling down. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythm of it all. My phone showed 9:12 p.m. when I checked it one last time. When I woke up, I didn't know what time it was at first. Everything was dark except for the faint orange glow from the streetlight outside. The digital clock on the dash said 3:04 a.m. My mouth was dry and the air inside the cab had gone stale. I shifted, trying to get comfortable again, when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, deliberate knocking on the passenger side door. I froze. It wasn't the sound of something brushing up against the truck. It wasn't wind or rain. It was a steady, distinct tapping, like a fingernail or maybe a coin hitting metal. I sat up, heart thumping, and peered through the curtain. The lot was still empty, just rows of silent trailers and the faint shimmer of the pond catching the light. I pushed the curtain aside and looked out the window, expecting maybe another driver, someone looking for a lumper check or lost paperwork. But there was nobody there. The gravel lot was empty, the pond perfectly still. I waited, squinting into the dark, trying to see if maybe someone was crouched low, playing some dumb prank. Nothing moved. I sat there for a moment, my pulse starting to slow again, and finally leaned back. Maybe I just dreamed it, I told myself. You hear all kinds of things when you're this tired. I laid back down, pulled the blanket over my shoulder, and closed my eyes. But the second my head hit the pillow, I heard it again. Tap, 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 but this time from the driver's side. I sat up fast, knocking my knee against the side panel. My chest tightened. That sound was closer, sharper. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the window, but the beam just bounced off the glass. I shoved the curtain open and looked out. Again, nothing. Just the pale glow from the lot light reflecting on the hood. I double-locked the doors, pulled the curtain halfway closed, and opened my side hatches a crack so I could hear better. My breath sounded loud in the small cab. About 15 minutes went by. Nothing but the quiet hum of the truck stop beyond the fence. Then I heard it, a faint splat, 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 moving slowly along the driver's side, like something wet slapping against the metal. My stomach twisted. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, listening. The sound moved from the front fender to the middle of the cab, then up toward the sleeper area. I reached for my tire thumper hanging by the bunk, a short, heavy stick with a worn rubber grip. I held it tight, ready for whatever was out there. Then a thud hit the roof loud enough to make the whole cab shake. My heart jumped into my throat. I stared up at the ceiling, waiting. Another scrape, like claws or maybe boots shifting against the metal. That's when I decided I wasn't going to sit there and wait. I gripped the thumper tighter, slowly moved toward the driver's window, and planned to yank the curtain open the second I heard another sound. My whole body was tense, my palms sweaty. The night outside seemed heavier, thicker somehow, pressing against the glass. Then it happened. A shadow moved fast across the windshield, followed by a fluttering noise, wings beating against the air. Before I could even react, something big and heavy slid off the top of the cab and slammed down onto the hood. I jumped, almost hitting my head on the ceiling. It was a goose. A damn goose. It stood there on my hood, shaking its wings, neck stretched out like it was ready to fight. Its eyes caught the light and glinted, dark and glassy. It waddled a few steps, turned its head, and just stared at me. I didn't move. I just stared back, still gripping that tire thumper like an idiot. Then from outside the door I heard that same tapping again, faster this time. Tap, tap, tap. I spun toward the sound, slammed the handle up, and yanked the door open. Another goose was right there, flapping awkwardly, honking so loud it echoed across the lot. It scuttled away, honking and flapping like it had just pulled the best prank of its life. I sat there for a second, blinking, trying to process the fact that I'd just been harassed by birds. When I finally stepped out, the pond was alive with noise. Dozens of geese were out there, honking and splashing, chasing each other across the water. A few stood near the trucks, pecking at the gravel or wandering under the lot lights. The one on my hood took off, flapping hard and disappearing into the dark. I climbed back into the cab and shut the door, still holding the thumper even though I knew how stupid that looked now. My heart was still hammering. Every few minutes another goose would land on the cab, its webbed feet thumping above me, or peck lightly at the mirrors or door handles. It went on like that for hours. By the time the sun started to rise, I'd given up on sleep. The geese were still out there, waddling around like they owned the place. My windshield was dotted with muddy footprints and a few feathers stuck to the wipers. When my pickup time finally came, I was more than ready to leave. As I pulled out of that lot, I caught one last look at the pond in my side mirror. A thin layer of mist hanging above it, the water rippling with movement. A whole army of those birds standing along the bank watching the trucks come and go. It wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural, but it was eerie all the same. The way they'd surrounded the truck in the dark, silent one second and loud the next. I'd slept in hundreds of lots before, and that was the first time I ever felt watched the entire night. Even after I hit the highway, I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see one of them clinging to the roof. I didn't stop driving until I was 2 towns over. The sun was up, the sky bright again, but I still couldn't shake the image of those black eyes staring through the windshield. All over a few damn geese.